June 1968. Bruce Lee walks into a San Francisco funeral home to pay respects to the man he destroyed 4 years earlier. What he discovers in the next 60 seconds doesn't just challenge everything he built his career on, it plants the seed of guilt that will drive him to exhaustion and death within 5 years. The Ming Dynasty Funeral Home sits on the corner of Jackson and Grant in San Francisco's Chinatown. 3 stories of weathered brick, red painted trim peeling at the edges, gold Chinese characters above the entrance, vertical, traditional style. The kind of place where old ways still matter, where tradition isn't performance, it's survival. Bruce Lee stands across the street. Black suit, white shirt, no tie. His hands are in his pockets. Not moving, just watching the entrance. Cars pass between him and the building. Taxis, delivery trucks, the normal rhythm of a Tuesday afternoon in June. But Bruce doesn't cross. Not yet. He's been standing here for 11 minutes. The funeral started 20 minutes ago. He's late on purpose. Didn't want to walk in with the crowd. Didn't want the stares, the whispers, the recognition. Didn't want Wong Jack Man's students and family to see him arrive as if he had a right to be there. Because technically, he doesn't. Technically, he's the reason they're all inside that building right now. Bruce takes a breath, crosses the street. His shoes make no sound on the pavement. Years of martial arts training, you learn to move without announcing yourself. Learn to control every micro movement. Even something as simple as walking becomes deliberate. He reaches the entrance. The door is heavy wood. Dark lacquer, brass handle worn smooth from decades of hands. He can hear voices inside. Cantonese, low murmurs, the particular tone people use when death is in the room. Bruce pushes the door open. The lobby is small, red carpet, dark wood paneling, incense burning in brass holders mounted on the walls. The smell hits him immediately, sandalwood, mixed with something floral he can't identify, mixed with the faint chemical scent of embalming fluid that no amount of incense fully covers. An elderly woman sits behind a reception desk. She looks up. Her face registers recognition, not celebrity recognition, something else, something that makes her eyes narrow slightly before she controls the expression. She knows who he is, knows what he did. Bruce asks in Cantonese where the service is being held. His Cantonese is fluent but accented. He grew up in Hong Kong, but English has become his primary language in America. The woman points to stairs leading up. 2nd floor, the main chapel. Bruce thanks her. She doesn't respond, just watches him walk toward the staircase. The stairs creak under his weight. Each step announces his presence. The voices from above get clearer as he climbs. Cantonese prayers, the rhythmic chanting of Buddhist sutras. A voice, older, male, probably a monk, leading the recitation. Bruce reaches the 2nd floor landing. A narrow hallway, doors on both sides. The chapel is at the end. Double doors, slightly ajar. Light spilling out into the dim hallway. He stops outside the doors. Through the gap, he can see inside. Rows of wooden chairs, maybe 60 people, all facing forward. At the front of the room, a casket. Closed, dark wood with brass handles. Surrounded by white flowers, chrysanthemums, lilies, the traditional funeral flowers. Above the casket, a framed photograph of Wong Jack Man. Black and white. He's younger in the photo. Maybe mid-30s, wearing a traditional kung fu uniform. Standing in a formal pose. His face is serious, dignified, the face of a master. Bruce has seen that face before. In person, 4 years ago, December 1964, the fight that nobody was supposed to talk about. The fight that everybody talked about anyway. Bruce was teaching Kung Fu to non-Chinese students in Oakland. Breaking the unwritten rule. The old masters in San Francisco's Chinatown didn't like it. Thought he was prostituting sacred Chinese knowledge to foreigners. Thought he was making money off techniques that should stay within the Chinese community. Wong Jack Man was sent to deliver a message. Stop teaching non-Chinese, or face consequences. Bruce refused. Wong challenged him to a fight. If Bruce won, he could keep teaching. If Wong won, Bruce would close his school. They fought in Bruce's school. Closed doors. A handful of witnesses. No cameras. No referees. Just 2 men and their understanding of what martial arts meant. The fight lasted 3 minutes. Bruce won. Not just won, dominated. Chased Wong around the room. Punched him. Kicked him. Didn't stop until Wong's students pulled them apart and Wong admitted defeat by leaving through the back door. Bruce thought it was over. Thought he'd proven his point. Thought he'd defended his right to teach whoever he wanted. He didn't know what else he'd done. Didn't know until now. Bruce pushes the chapel door open wider. The hinges make a soft sound. Not loud, but in the silence between prayers, it's enough. Several heads turn. People in the back rows. Their faces shift through the same sequence. Curiosity, recognition, something harder. Bruce walks in, doesn't look at them, keeps his eyes forward, finds an empty chair in the very back row. far corner, as unobtrusive as possible. He sits. The chair creaks slightly. More people turn now. Whispers start. In Cantonese. English. A mix. He catches fragments. That's Bruce Lee, the one who fought Shifu Wong. What's he doing here? A woman in the front row, older, maybe 60, wearing all white in the traditional mourning color, turns completely around. Stares directly at Bruce. Her face is rigid, grief mixed with fury. Wong's wife. Has to be. Bruce meets her eyes. Doesn't look away. Doesn't apologize with his expression, but doesn't challenge either. Just acknowledges. I'm here. I know what I did. I came anyway. She turns back to the front. Stiff, radiating anger. The monk at the front, bald, saffron robes, maybe 70 years old, continues the chant. If he noticed Bruce's arrival, he doesn't show it. Just keeps reciting sutras. The rhythm unchanged. Bruce sits in silence, hands folded in his lap. Not traditional prayer position, just resting, neutral. He looks at the casket, at the photograph of Wong above it. 4 years ago, Wong was teaching at 3 schools in Chinatown. Had maybe 40 active students. Was respected in the traditional community. Not famous, not wealthy, but respected. A keeper of the old ways. Bruce has heard rumors since the fight. Heard that Wong's reputation never recovered. That students left. That other schools stopped referring to him. That the old masters who sent him to challenge Bruce turned their backs when he lost. That he'd been sick. Cancer. Started 2 years after the fight. That he died bitter. Broken. Bruce has heard these rumors. Dismissed some. Questioned others. Told himself that a 3-minute fight 4 years ago couldn't be responsible for a man's entire decline. But sitting here, looking at that casket, the doubt is harder to ignore. The monk finishes his chant. Silence fills the chapel. Heavy, thick. Then someone stands. Front row. A man, maybe 40. Chinese. Wearing a black suit. He walks to the front. Stands next to the casket. Faces the gathered crowd. He introduces himself in Cantonese. David Chen. Wong Jack Man's senior student. 15 years of training together. He's here to speak about Shifu Wong. About who he was. What he meant. David's voice is steady at first. Controlled. He talks about meeting Wong in 1953. About being a teenager with no direction. About how Wong took him in. Taught him discipline, patience, the old forms, the traditional way. About how Wong never charged him money when David couldn't afford lessons. How Wong fed him when David had nowhere to go. How Wong became more than a teacher. Became a father figure. David's voice starts to crack. He talks about the later years. About watching Shifu Wong change. Become quieter, more withdrawn. Stop teaching as much. Stop leaving his apartment as much. About how Wong would sit in his school, alone, practicing forms with nobody watching. About how the students stopped coming. About how Wong never complained, never blamed anyone, just kept practicing. Kept trying to maintain the tradition even as the world moved on without him. David stops talking. His shoulders shake. Silent crying. After a moment, he continues. He says Shifu Wong died 3 days ago. At home, alone. His wife had gone to the market. When she came back, he was gone. Peaceful, sitting in a chair, hands folded in his lap like he was meditating. David says the doctors said it was cancer. Lung cancer, spread to his liver, his bones, his brain. But David says, and his voice gets harder here, anger cutting through the grief, that the cancer wasn't what killed Wong. What killed him was shame. The shame of losing. The shame of being rejected by the community he'd served for 30 years. The shame of watching everything he built crumble because he couldn't beat a younger, faster, more modern fighter in 3 minutes. David says Wong never talked about the fight. Never mentioned Bruce Lee's name. But it was there, always there, in every quiet moment, in every empty chair in the school, in every former student who walked past without acknowledging him. David says the fight didn't just defeat Shifu Wong. It erased him, and the man responsible is sitting in this room right now. David turns, looks directly at Bruce. Everyone turns. 60 pairs of eyes, all on Bruce. The chapel is silent. Nobody moves. The air feels thick, difficult to breathe. David asks the question in Cantonese, but loud enough, clear enough, that even the non-speakers understand the tone. Was it worth it, destroying a man's life to prove you were right? Bruce doesn't move, doesn't look away, just sits there, receiving the question, the accusation, the grief and fury wrapped into 7 words. He could defend himself, could explain that Wong challenged him, that the fight was Wong's idea, that Bruce was just protecting his right to teach, could explain that the traditional masters were wrong, that keeping Kung Fu locked away in Chinese-only schools was killing the art. That what Bruce did, opening it up, modernizing it, making it functional, was necessary. Was evolution, was progress, could explain that one fight shouldn't define a man's entire career, that Wong's decline wasn't Bruce's fault, that cancer and community politics and the changing world did this, not a 3-minute fight in 1964. He could say all of this. He doesn't, because sitting in this chapel, looking at that casket, hearing David's voice break with grief, Bruce suddenly isn't sure any of those explanations matter. Maybe he was right. Maybe his philosophy of adapting, evolving, breaking tradition to make martial arts more effective was correct. But maybe being right isn't enough. Maybe destroying someone to prove you're right is just destruction, no matter how correct your ideas are. Bruce opens his mouth. No sound comes out at first. He clears his throat, speaks in Cantonese. I'm sorry. 2 words. Quiet. Not an explanation. Not a defense. Just 2 words. David stares at him. Doesn't respond. Just stares. His face working through emotions too complex to name. Then David turns away. Walks back to his seat. Sits down next to a woman who's crying. Puts an arm around her. The monk stands. Begins another chant. The service continues. Bruce sits through the entire thing. Another hour. Prayers. More people speaking about Wong. Stories from students. Memories. Grief. Bruce doesn't move. Doesn't leave early. Stays until the very end. When the service finishes, people file out. Going to the cemetery for the burial. Bruce stays seated. Lets everyone pass. Doesn't try to talk to anyone. Doesn't make eye contact. The chapel empties. Just Bruce and the casket and the flowers and the photograph of Wong. Bruce stands. Walks to the front. Stops in front of the casket. He looks at Wong's photograph. Really looks at it. Tries to see past the formal pose, the serious expression. Tries to imagine the man behind the image. The teacher, the husband, the person who existed before and after that 3-minute fight. Bruce bows. Deep, traditional, the bow you give to a master. Then he leaves. Outside, the sun is setting. The street is busy. Normal life. Cars. People. The world continuing like nothing happened. Bruce walks. Doesn't know where he's going. Just walks. His mind won't stop. He thinks about Wong. About David's question. About whether winning was worth this. He thinks about his philosophy. Absorb what is useful. Reject what is useless. Add what is uniquely your own. The foundation of Jeet Kune Do. The idea that drove him to fight Wong in the first place. The idea that tradition for tradition's sake is death, that evolution is necessary, that martial arts must adapt to be effective. He still believes this, still knows he was right. But standing in that chapel, seeing the human cost of being right, that's different. That's the part his philosophy doesn't address. What happens to the people you defeat when you revolutionize their world? What responsibility do you have to the traditions you destroy? Bruce doesn't have an answer. He walks for 2 hours. Through Chinatown, through North Beach, down to the Embarcadero, the waterfront. He stops at a pier. Looks out at the bay. The water is dark, the lights from Oakland reflecting on the surface. He thinks about teaching, about his students, about the non-Chinese students he fought to protect. James, Jerry, the others, good people, talented, dedicated, were they worth Wong's life? The question feels impossible, unfair. You can't weigh one human life against another's opportunity to learn. But you also can't pretend the cost didn't exist. Bruce makes a decision, not a dramatic decision, not a complete reversal of his philosophy, but a shift, a recognition. He decides that from now on, when he teaches, when he develops Jeet Kune Do, when he challenges tradition, he'll do it with respect. With acknowledgement of what's being lost, not just what's being gained. He'll teach that evolution is necessary, but he'll also teach that evolution without compassion is just violence wearing the mask of progress. He'll teach his students to be better than he was in that fight. To win without destroying, to prove their point without erasing the person who disagrees. It's a small shift, subtle, most people won't notice, but Bruce will carry it. Will think about Wong every time he teaches, every time he writes about his philosophy. Every time he challenges a traditional technique, will carry the weight of knowing that being right isn't enough. That how you win matters as much as whether you win. 3 months later, Bruce is in Hong Kong, visiting family, working on film ideas. He's in a bookstore in Kowloon, browsing martial arts philosophy texts, looking for ideas to incorporate into his teaching. A book catches his eye. Thin, blue cover, title in Chinese, The Tao of Teaching. He opens it, flips through. The author is a Taoist monk, writing about education, about the responsibility teachers have to students, about the balance between challenging people to grow and destroying them in the process. Bruce reads a passage. The monk writes, the river cuts through rock not because of its power, but because of its persistence. The teacher who forces change creates resistance. The teacher who flows around obstacles creates transformation. Both reach the destination, only one leaves the stone intact. Bruce buys the book, takes it back to his hotel, reads it cover to cover that night. The next day, he starts writing notes, ideas, not for a book, not yet, just thoughts, expanding on his philosophy. He writes about economy of motion, about directness, about functionality, all the core principles of Jeet Kune Do. But he adds something new. He writes about water, about Bruce Lee's now famous philosophy of be like water, but he frames it differently than before. Before, be like water meant adaptability, formlessness, the ability to fit into any container, any situation, the ability to overcome obstacles through fluidity rather than force. Now, Bruce adds another layer. Water doesn't just adapt, water nourishes. Water gives life even as it shapes the landscape. Water transforms without destroying. Bruce writes, the martial artist who only breaks is not water. He is the hammer, useful for demolition, useless for growth. He's writing about himself, about the fight with Wong, about the realization in that funeral chapel. These notes will eventually become part of the Tao of Jeet Kune Do. The book Bruce is working on. The book that won't be published until after his death. But the ideas are forming now. Here, 3 months after Wong's funeral, in a Hong Kong hotel room at 2 a.m. while the city sleeps below. September 1972, 4 years after Wong's funeral, Bruce is in Hong Kong, filming Way of the Dragon, his second major film, the one where he fights Chuck Norris in the Coliseum. He's exhausted, working 20-hour days, acting, directing, choreographing fights, editing, doing his own stunts, pushing his body past every reasonable limit. People ask why he works so hard, why he doesn't delegate, why he doesn't slow down. Bruce doesn't give the real answer. The real answer is guilt. Guilt about Wong, about winning that fight and destroying a life, about being right in a way that crushed someone else. Bruce is trying to prove that his philosophy can build, not just destroy. That evolution and compassion can coexist. That you can revolutionize martial arts without erasing the people who came before. He's trying to prove it through film, through reaching millions of people, through changing how the world sees Chinese martial arts, sees Asian men, sees the possibility of strength without stereotypes. If he can do that, if he can make his revolution actually help people instead of just defeating him, then maybe Wong's death meant something. Maybe the cost was worth it. But Bruce is running out of time. The exhaustion is constant now. Headaches, back pain, insomnia, his body is breaking down. Doctors tell him to rest. He can't rest, not until he's proven it. Not until the debt is paid. July 20, 1973. Bruce Lee collapses in Betty Ting Pei's apartment in Hong Kong. Brain edema, cerebral swelling. The official cause will be listed as reaction to pain medication. But the real cause is exhaustion. Years of pushing too hard, sleeping too little, demanding too much from a body that couldn't sustain it. He dies at age 32. Enter the Dragon will be released 6 days later. Will become a worldwide phenomenon. Will open doors for Asian actors, for martial arts films, for everything Bruce was trying to build. But Bruce never sees it. Never knows if his revolution was worth the cost. Never knows if Wong would have forgiven him. Never knows if redemption was possible. David Chen, Wong's senior student, the one who spoke at the funeral, hears about Bruce's death on the radio. He's in his apartment in San Francisco, teaching a small class, 6 students, learning the traditional forms Wong taught him. The news stops him mid-sentence. David sits down, tells his students to practice on their own. He needs a minute. He thinks about the funeral, about confronting Bruce, about the question he asked, was it worth it? About Bruce's answer, 2 words, I'm sorry. David never believed the apology. Not then, thought it was empty, performative, the kind of thing you say because you're supposed to, not because you mean it. But now, learning Bruce is dead at 32, worked himself to death trying to prove his philosophy could build something lasting, David isn't so sure. Maybe Bruce meant it. Maybe the sorry was real. Maybe Bruce carried Wong's death the same way David did. Maybe that's why he pushed so hard. Why he never stopped. Why he died trying. David goes to his altar, the small Buddhist shrine in his living room. Incense, photos, offerings. Wong's photograph is there, the same one from the funeral. The formal pose, the serious face. David lights incense, bows, says a prayer for Wong. Then he adds something new. He lights a second stick of incense, places it next to the first, says a prayer for Bruce. Not forgiveness, not exactly, but recognition, that both men paid a price. That revolution and tradition both cost something. That maybe nobody won that fight in 1964. They both just lost different things. David's students watch, confused, their Shifu teaching them to honor the man who destroyed the grand teacher. David explains. He says martial arts isn't about winning and losing. Not really. It's about understanding, about seeing that strength comes in many forms. That tradition and evolution aren't enemies, they're 2 sides of the same attempt to find truth. He says Wong was right about some things. Bruce was right about others. Both were wrong about some things too. He says the real lesson isn't who won the fight. It's what you do after. Whether you use your victory to build or just to conquer. He says Bruce tried to build. Tried so hard it killed him. That's worth respecting, even if you disagree with his methods. The students listen. Some understand, some don't. That's okay. David keeps teaching, keeps passing on Wong's forms. But he adds something, adds the lesson Bruce taught. The lesson Bruce learned too late. That being right isn't enough. That winning isn't enough. That you have to carry the weight of what your victories cost. Have to live with the people you defeat, the traditions you change, the world you reshape. Have to be water, not just in how you fight, in how you build. 50 years later, a researcher is writing a book about Bruce Lee. Interviewing people who knew him, trying to understand the man behind the legend. She finds David Chen. He's 93 now, still teaching, still practicing Wong's forms every morning. She asks about the fight, about Wong, about Bruce. David tells her the story. The funeral, the confrontation, the 2 words, "I'm sorry." He tells her he spent years being angry, decades, blaming Bruce for Wong's death, for the lost students, for the end of an era. But eventually, he understood something. Wong didn't die because he lost a fight. He died because he couldn't adapt when the world changed, couldn't find a way to honor tradition while acknowledging that evolution was necessary. Bruce didn't die because he was wrong. He died because he couldn't forgive himself for the cost of being right. Couldn't find peace with the fact that progress always leaves someone behind. Both men were trapped by pride, by guilt, by the impossible weight of trying to be perfect in an imperfect world. David says the lesson isn't about martial arts. Not really. It's about being human, about making choices that hurt people even when you're trying to help. About carrying the weight of those choices without letting it crush you. About finding the balance between standing firm and bending, between honoring the past and building the future, between winning and destroying. David says he teaches this now, to his students, to their students, a lineage of understanding that both Wong and Bruce paid for with their lives. He says it's the most important lesson he ever learned. And he learned it from both of them. The tradition and the revolution. The teacher who couldn't adapt and the fighter who couldn't forgive himself for adapting. Both necessary, both human, both gone too soon. The researcher asks one more question. If David could go back to that funeral, to that moment when he confronted Bruce, would he still ask the same question? David thinks for a long time. Then he says no. He wouldn't ask, was it worth it? He would ask, how do we make it worth it? How do we honor both what was lost and what was gained? How do we carry this forward without repeating the same mistakes? But he was young then, angry, grieving. You don't think of those questions when you're in pain. You only think of them later, after you've lived long enough to see that the world isn't divided into winners and losers. Just people trying to find truth, making mistakes, paying prices, hoping what they built lasts long enough to matter. David lights incense, 2 sticks, like he does every day. One for Wong, one for Bruce, both his teachers, both his cautionary tales, both the reason he still practices, still teaches, still tries to find the balance they couldn't. The smoke rises, mingles, becomes indistinguishable, tradition and revolution, both burning, both necessary, both gone, but the lesson remains. And that, David says, is how you make a death worth something. Not by pretending it didn't happen, not by assigning blame, but by learning, by growing, by being better than the people who came before. By being water, not the hammer, not the stone, water, flowing, shaping, nourishing, even as it cuts through rock. Especially then.